Speaker, and I rise to speak in support of this motion that mourns the Australians who have lost their lives in the horrific bushfire season and pays tribute to the nation's emergency personnel and volunteers who have worked and continue to work with colleagues from New Zealand, the USA and Canada, amongst other nations, to battle blazes across the country. It's been a fire season of devastation, 33 lives lost, including 9 firefighters, more than 3,000 homes destroyed and 17 million hectares burned, taking with it countless wildlife and livestock. So many of our fellow Australians have lost loved ones, homes and livelihoods. In my home state of New South Wales, 25 people have lost their lives tragically, including 3 volunteer firefighters and the 3 US crew members of a C-130 large air tanker that crashed on January 23. Mr Deputy Speaker, the number of homes lost in New South Wales stands at 2,418 and is expected to rise as damage assessments continue. More than 5.4 million hectares have been burned and 18,000 head of livestock are dead. But right across Australia, bushfires have taken their toll. In Victoria, 3 people have lost their lives and 1.5 million hectares have been burned. The houses destroyed so far number 405 and more than 7,000 head of livestock have been lost. In South Australia, 3 people have died, 185 homes have been lost and 300,000 hectares have been burned. In Queensland, 49 homes have been destroyed and more than 2.5 million hectares have burned. In Western Australia, 2 homes have been lost at 786,000 hectares burned. And in Tasmania, 3 houses have been lost and more than 36,000 hectares burned. And of course, fires have raged near the nation's capital as well, burning more than 58,000 hectares of land. Indeed, it was sobering to return to Canberra for members of Parliament last week to see the blackened bush and smell the smoky air. Near my home in Lake Macquarie, fires have threatened homes and closed roads in Charlestown, Wangi, and the fire at Killingworth affected the M1 motorway. On the Central Coast, Charmhaven was impacted and the Gospers Mountain fire threatened communities for several weeks. In the Hunter Valley, communities have been threatened by blazes, the likes of which firefighters have never seen before. Some of these fires have been large in area, others have hit hard and with great intensity. In the words of one firefighter, our rule book says we should never take on a flame height in excess of 3 metres front on. We didn't have that opportunity at North Rothbury. The flames were 3 or 4 times that height, but they were coming straight over Wine Country Drive, directly on top of houses. So we just had to throw the rule back out of the window. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is the challenge that confronted many, many people as they fought these fires. And so I want to state and express my and my electorate's gratitude to the brave firefighters who risked their lives to save their fellow humans. Some of these firefighters have been serving for months on deployments throughout Australia. I thank you for your sacrifice and your service. I also recognise and thank the hundreds of maritime workers who were involved in rescuing and supplying their fellow stranded Australians. Thank you to the individual and collective acts of generosity we've seen throughout the community, people who've donated goods and money. I also want to, in my position as Shadow Minister for International Development in the Pacific, thank the governments of so many Pacific Island nations who have sent personnel, typically from their armed forces, to help in this crisis. I also want to thank the generosity of those Pacific Island nations, nations that have much less resources than Australia, but individual citizens and governments have dug deep into their pockets to donate to the bushfire appeal. So thank you again for your contribution. I want to thank the ADF for their assistance in this time. I want to thank all the other emergency services personnel who have served and helped in this crisis. Mr Deputy Speaker, I should also note that it was the local ABC radio that kept people informed of where evacuation centres were, when it was safe to return and what the impact was. And it was the local ABC radio that provided the space for the outpouring of community spirit. We really saw our nation coming together and people throughout the community are helping in this crisis. But next to every loss, as hard as it seems to believe at the time, is a win in protecting homes and property, a win in saving lives. We've seen incredible scenes this summer of orange skies and roaring flames, and always in the foreground, men and women with hoses in hand, fighting to save communities and themselves. It takes incredible determination and courage in the face of what we have seen this season to push on, to keep fighting, yet that is what we've seen in every state of Australia. There is no doubt that this bushfire season is a national emergency, one that requires a national response and national leadership. For even those who have not been directly affected by fires have been indirectly affected by smoke, by road closures, by interruptions to their holiday plans, by the water restrictions that have been made necessary by a prolonged drought. It is vital that we learn from this bushfire season, that we develop a comprehensive national response to meet the physical and mental needs of the communities affected, that we begin a national audit to identify and address the mass destruction of wildlife and habitats as identified by the Shadow Minister for the Environment and my colleague, the member for Griffith, and start working on a national plan to provide financial support for volunteer firefighters. Importantly, Mr Deputy Speaker, we must also sit down with the fire chiefs who warned about this disastrous fire season, but who were not listened to, and we must heed the warnings of scientists who have written to the Prime Minister earlier this month with a message that there is no strong, resilient Australia without deep cuts to greenhouse gas emissions. In no way does it diminish our mourning for lost lives or our respect for brave firefighters to talk about climate change as a contributor to this horrific bushfire season. In no way does it diminish our determination to rebuild the communities affected, to talk about the mitigation and adaptation that climate change requires us to make. As several hundred scientists wrote to the Prime Minister, the current emissions reduction targets of Australia and the world are insufficient and will commit us to 3 degrees or more of warming by the end of this century. And they continued, we call on the leaders to unite to develop non-partisan long-term policies that will enable the managed transition to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 that the scientific evidence show is required to avoid dangerous human-caused climate change. There is no doubt that human-caused climate change is making fire seasons and fire itself worse. We are experiencing more frequent and more extreme fire weather conditions during summer and an earlier start to the fire season and a lengthening of the season into winter. Fire management is becoming increasingly challenging, Mr Deputy Speaker, and we must engage in a desperate task of mitigating our climate emissions. Adaptation will not be enough, because if we just settle for adaptation now, Mr Deputy Speaker, what we experienced at the moment through this awful spring and summer and the winter to come will not be just the new normal. That will actually be less than what we can experience in the future if we allow global warming to exceed 3 degrees. What we saw this season, unfortunately, is, some would say, the new normal, but it can get worse, Mr Deputy Speaker, if we just focus on adaptation. It is in the national interest, it is in the global interest to actually focus on mitigation to restricting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade. Otherwise, what we faced this season is a mere precursor to what will occur in the future. And I'm not being alarmist, I'm responding to the best scientific advice on what is occurring and what can occur in the future. So this is not something that our country can ignore. We owe it to the Australians who have lost their lives, to the families who have lost loved ones, to the communities who have lost businesses and livelihoods, and to the men and women who continue to stand firm in the face of the raging infernos we have seen bear down on Australia this summer. We owe it to all Australians to take real action on climate change. And on behalf of the people of Shortland, I pass on my condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one, to everyone who's lost a home or a business, to those mourning the loss of 1 billion wildlife, to those, and I pass on my great thanks to the sacrifice of the firefighters and the other personnel who have helped us in this crisis.